This is The Culture.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Cinema Wave podcast. We're back. Happy holidays. Hope you guys enjoyed your Christmas day and season with everybody. We are now talking about more awards fair potentially with A24's new wrestling drama, The Iron Claw. I'm going to be one of your hosts. My name is Darian Scalamoni. I am joined by Liz Seiko.
Hello, everybody.
And then we're also joined for the first time on the producer cam by Vinny Albano.
Hello.
Yeah. All right. So this is a movie that we have been wanting to talk about for a bit, because I think a lot of us saw it probably early last week before we're recording.
Oh, yeah.
We're recording the day after Christmas. And this was one that I think even Liz, back in our most anticipated episode, like when we were halfway through the year, this was one that was like very high on my list. Mm-hmm. The fact that I'm a big, and for the people that are wrestling fans, I'm wearing a wrestling t-shirt. This is AEW. Kevin Von Erich is associated with them now, like very big wrestling fan for a lot of my life. And the fact that this story was finally going to be told on screen and teaming up with A24, I was very excited for that. And especially seeing all the photos and the first looks that came out of Efron and Jeremy Allen White and Harris Dickinson and Stanley Simons as the Von Erich boys kind of amped up that excitement for me too. But I just want to ask both of you guys, I'll start with Liz, just gauge, like, did you know anything about this story going into it? And based on just overall thoughts, like, how did you feel when you started to sort of enter yourself into the wrestling world, so to speak?
So, no, I knew absolutely nothing about this story. The extent of my knowledge, I really didn't even watch the trailer going into this. I'm kind of not doing that a lot this year just because I want to go in and fully with a fresh slate. The only things that I knew going into this was it's about wrestling and it's about brothers. It's the bottom line.
That's kind of all you needed, though.
That's what I feel like. That's all that I needed to know, because I feel like if I knew more, there were moments where I like gasped just because of the shock that I really didn't know what was gonna come next with the story. And so I'm kind of happy I didn't go deep diving and learning about them before. But yeah, the first time that I had learned about this was all of a sudden like A24 posted a picture of them, like the four brothers, like Zac Efron, Jeremy Allen White, in their sitting in a truck, I think was the first picture. And maybe you sent it to me and we're like, let's go.
And you had no idea
and
what
I
it
was just like, okay. I was like, I'm ready for it. Like, let's see what happens. But no, I'm really not involved in the wrestling world at all. I have very bare minimum knowledge about it. I've never heard of the Iron Claw move before. But so going in, I was very blind. But I had also been seeing really great reviews specifically for Zac Efron's performance. So I was excited. And are we doing first thoughts right now, or?
Yeah, you can go into your first thoughts.
I loved it. It was so good. I cried at the end. It was, honestly, I think it was a great film too, because as somebody that doesn't know anything about wrestling, they didn't leave you in the dark the whole time. They kind of like brought you into the world right away. They weren't making you, because sometimes with films like this that are very niche about a certain sport or even like a genre, sometimes it's about music, like composers. If you don't have prior knowledge about it, it can kind of seem a little hard to catch up with the story.
Yeah, it gets like a little too inside baseball.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like they stop doing basic plot points because they assume their audience knows what's coming next. But I think they did a really nice job of getting me comfortable with the world. Used to like these huge men wearing like the tightest clothes ever and just like bodying each other fully. I thought they did an incredible job. The performances were, honestly, for the entire cast, I think it was perfectly cast and really strong in-depth performances. Sometimes I think when they have this many characters to touch on, they tend to just focus on one character, which they kind of did, Zac Efron mostly. But then sometimes I feel like characters can get lost in the background, and I don't think they did this. I think they did a really nice job of trying to give each brother their moment and let them shine and tell kind of their story in a way. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, the story is literally just about the brothers and some tragic, horrible events that happened to their family. And I think they did a really great job. I think they did a nice homage to them, and it was entertaining the whole time.
Yeah. Vinny?
Yeah. So
Non-spoiler. This is just your first
Non-spoiler,
thought.
yeah.
This movie hit me like a truck.
Mm-hmm.
I adored it. From beginning to end. I think that, like you mentioned, Efron is surprisingly a standout here. Just incredible all around. The entire cast, Jeremy Allen White as well as Harris Dickinson. Just I adored both of them throughout. And even excuse me if my pronunciation is off, but Holt McCallany.
McCallany, yeah.
McCallany, yeah. He was in Mindhunter, which I watched the first season. He's great in that. And he was really great in this because, like, you really begin to hate him. Like, especially towards the end of the movie, I
know.
absolutely
Yeah.
hated him. Also, underrated here, Maura Tierney. She was incredible. And the performances really, like, are the standout here, I think. That's what really carry a lot of the film. But also just, like, the filmmaking in general from, like, we'll go more in depth later on, but I want to talk about the cinematography. As a director of photography myself, I adored it, as well as, like, Sean Durkin was a name that I was not familiar with, but, like, coming out of this, I was like, okay, like, I gotta watch out now. Whenever I see the name Sean Durkin, I'm gonna be excited from this point forward.
Yeah.
I just thought, like, also I wasn't familiar with the story at all. I knew of the Von Erich, like, curse. Like, I knew that
So you knew about it a little bit.
Yeah, I knew that the family had tragedy around them, and I knew, like, how big their names were in the industry, but I didn't know any of the details.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
coming out of this, I literally was broken, but I loved it. There was an optimistic end to it. So there's something to take away from there rather than just being depressed the whole time. But it hit me like a truck. Absolutely adored it, and I think they did a great job.
Yeah. So with I had an understanding. I knew of the tragedy that we're trying to tiptoe around until we get to the spoilers. And, like, I had known synonymously because of the age I was when I was born, like, and so much of this story takes place years before all of us were born, that I was aware of, like, that name was synonymous with tragedy, let alone wrestling. Like, it was just like they were basically the Kennedys of wrestling is how people talk about their family.
Oh, okay.
And because of a lot of different reasons,
Well, yeah.
and which we'll get to. But yeah, from this movie, this is a movie, the small select few in my life so far that have made me, like, weep, like, by the end of it. So, like, I think all three of us, like, as we're talking about, like, we all cried at the end of this movie, and probably at other points, but the ending alone, and so much of the weight being on. Though it is a true ensemble piece, and I agree with you, Liz, what you were saying, they do such a great job of making every single character feel like their own, while still feeling that the family is a character in and of itself together. I think this is Efron's best performance ever, and I don't think it's close. I thought that he did a good job as Ted Bundy. It was a different kind of role for him, and I think he tried to sort of elevate his dramatic chops in something like that. But this movie, he sort of camouflages himself. Like, it's the first time that you really see the true acting ability that he can have. And I remember when I first heard of his casting, not that I don't like Zac Efron as an actor, but knowing what I did know of the story, I was worried, because I was like, this is a movie that it's taken, or a story that it's never been told narratively before. There's tons of documentaries on this, but it's never been told in the narrative form. And I was worried about him being able to bear so much of that weight being the lead of this movie, despite it being a true ensemble. But if it were up to me and I was choosing, and I'd have to think about it, like we've talked about on multiple of the other past podcasts, if it were up to me, I would absolutely have him nominated for this movie. I think he is unbelievably just brilliant. Like, I couldn't believe that, again, like, you get lost in it. You don't even see him as Zac Efron for a lot of the movie. So I do think that's a big thing that goes along with it. I love the script. I love the way that they kind of structured the narrative of the story. And I don't think, again, like, maybe we've had some issues sometimes with runtimes this year. I think this movie is, like, perfect in terms of its storytelling. Like, I think it's beginning, middle, and end. It just goes through this perfect narrative structure on what happened, especially with so many details with this story, which we'll get to in the spoilers. Like, unfortunately, having to be left out, there's a reason behind why they had to do that. And I thought that, like you were talking about too, Sean Durkin, who I've never seen any of his work either, but I've heard really great things about his debut film, Marcy May Marlene. But I think him tackling a story of this magnitude and hopefully getting more attention because of how well it seems this movie is doing for A24 and critically, I would love to see him do, like, I think the 2 movies he did before this also are based in, like, really, like, serious, dramatic, tragic circumstances. So, but like you said, it ends on an optimistic note, and I do think that that's the great takeaway from it, is like you get hit like a truck for basically 90% of the movie. And you end on this sort of circumstantial situation with Kevin Von Erich where you're happy for what is to come for him and for his family. So that's a pretty good roundabout way, I feel like, of talking about this movie without diving into spoilers. Is there anything else we want to add before we dive into spoilers?
No, I mean, I think the reason also, I think a lot of people, maybe for Zac Efron, were a little apprehensive at first. And I think that he pulled through, and that's why a lot of people are giving him the praise that he deserves. I think in comparison to his Ted Bundy performance, I think you're right with what you said about him taking a step with that role into more dramatic roles. So I think in his mind, he probably had more to prove with that job. Versus this one, I think he wasn't trying to prove to like the world or the industry that he can do dramatic. I think he was just trying to deliver a true performance to the real family, and rather just do a good service for what's the character's name? Kevin
Von Erich.
Yeah, and so I think that also takes the pressure off of not trying to be a great performance. You're just trying to deliver a true performance.
Yeah.
And I felt that throughout the film. I felt like he wasn't like, oh my God, I need to deliver an Oscar-worthy scene. I was just kind of like, it fell out.
It wasn't showy.
No, it wasn't, which I love.
At all, I agree.
And it wasn't like
Very
he was
authentic.
trying to carry the whole film on his back. You know how some people, when they have like the lead role, they'll just like, I don't know. They just give you the vibe that they're trying to make the film all about them.
Sure.
And I got the vibe in every scene that had multiple people in it. Zac was just letting other ones kind of take the screen time, which was nice.
For sure. Vinny?
Yeah, I agree. For me, I never watched the Ted Bundy film, and I also just like, I don't know what other roles he did, but I've always seen Zac Efron as the High School Musical guy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, of course.
So I never really, I didn't expect much going into this. Like, I didn't know what I was going to get out of it, and I didn't think that Zac Efron was going to be the standout. I thought that his peers were going to overshadow him, but they didn't. And he was really, really good. However, I feel like his performance may go under the radar just because of the release of this film. It's very late in the year, and I'm scared because I agree. I want him to get nominated. I think he's
at least a nom, like something.
We had talked too, I think a couple episodes ago, about how, or maybe this was off camera, but Iron Claw got like I think actually 0 Golden Globe nominations, which again.
But was it the cutoff date? Is that why?
I don't know if it was or not, because I think All of Us Strangers still technically, but again, that was like a festival movie, and I don't know if Iron Claw played at any festivals, so I don't know if that had something to do with it. But like, and if you're a fan of the Golden Globes, I apologize, but like, I do think that there's a certain standard, like Golden Globes versus the Academy Awards, like that has a lot more prestige to it, and I do hope that it does get recognized in that regard. And I'm not expecting it to get a crazy amount of nominations, but I do think that Efron should be recognized because it's a heavy performance.
Yeah. No, I agree. I just think it's just because there hasn't been enough time to like garner the discussion around his performance and like the attention around his performance yet, which I'm scared that the Oscars are just gonna, look over him and, just completely overlook him, which would be a shame if that were the case. But I really want him to get a nom. I really want him to get
I know.
I mean, for 1917, which was a film that released pretty late in the year, whatever that released. It would release like
It was probably like the same timing as Iron Claw. I think it was around it was anywhere from like the 18th to like till Christmas, I would say. That actually also might have been a January release.
It was a Christmas, December 25th.
Okay, there
2019.
So it's similar vibe with that, and at least the one thing, Vinny, not to cut you off, I apologize, but
no, you're good.
Like the Academy Awards this year, I believe, are like the first week of March. So I do think that there's more time, hopefully, for these movies. And like All of Us Strangers is another example. Like that movie doesn't go wide until January 22nd, which is like crazy late. So you do hope that this movie does get more attention, and so maybe there is room for that to happen.
Not to do a deep dive on Golden Globes really quickly, but there's 3 films that they're saying have been like snubbed, and it's The Iron Claw, Napoleon, and Ferrari, which like I haven't seen Napoleon and Ferrari yet, but from what I've been hearing, that they're not very standout films.
Yeah.
But for me, I feel like The Iron Claw, I've preferred it compared to some of the other films that I've seen this year.
And
100%.
On Rotten Tomatoes, I was just looking at this earlier. The critics score for Iron Claw is 89, and the audience score is 93. So it's still like it's a
high.
movie. It's very high in both, and that usually doesn't happen. Like you're usually going to have a little bit more of a dip either way.
Yeah.
And I agree with what Liz was saying. Like I haven't seen Napoleon yet. I know you did. You did a review on the channel, and I've heard it's tonally it's a mess, and there's issues with the overall script and how they decided to make edits. And Ferrari is one that I just heard. It's like an underbaked biopic. It's just like one of those typical, like you get them every year. Like some people felt that way with like House of Gucci. Some people felt that way with other films that have come out in recent years where it's just something that you have a lot of anticipation building to it. I mean, Michael Mann, Adam Driver, Patrick Dempsey, Shailene Woodley, Penelope Cruz. But sometimes that doesn't mean anything, like just bringing in all the talent. It starts with the story. And if they deliver the story that doesn't work. This movie, on the other hand, again, I think the story and the core of what it is, it's devastating, man. Like this movie hits you, like you said, like a truck, but it hits you at so many different points for someone that has no reference to what happened. Like, I do feel like it's delivered in such a way where the scene composition, it catches you off guard in the perfect way to make you feel the way you're supposed to be feeling based on what the director was giving you. So I don't know. I feel like we need to start going into spoilers because we're gonna start
spiraling.
Yeah, we're gonna start going into a different territory. So are we good before?
Yeah, I'd say we're good. I think it's just if anyone's watching this who hasn't watched the film yet, check it out. Be prepared to be hurt in the heart, but it's just people like myself and us here like. We appreciate that. Like, I feel like I came out of this with like almost a whole new perspective. You know what I mean? Like, it was so heartbreaking, but in the end, your heart is kind of wrapped up into these bandages, and you walk forward with a whole new meaning. And I love that. I think this film was just from beginning to end such a beautiful piece of filmmaking, just all throughout. Just everything together, just emphasized, everything. Just the actors complemented the script, and the script complemented the actors, and all the filmmakers, Sean Durkin and cinematographer Machis Earl D, they all complemented each other, and I think this is easily one of my favorite films of the year.
Nice.
Awesome. All right, should we do it?
Yes.
I echo everything you said, by the way, Vinny, but I need to start talking about the details of this movie or I'll freak out. All right. The Iron Claw. So if you guys have not watched the movie, totally agree with everything Vinny just said. Go and see this movie as quickly as possible, then come back to our review, listen to the rest of it, because there's a lot we're going to talk about, a lot we're going to dive into, and there's a lot of nuance to this story and the details that are to follow that we're about to express in our analysis of the film.
Yes.
So you've been warned. Spoilers are ahead, and we're going to start talking about it. So just to recap, The Iron Claw is a movie that is a biopic of this iconic and legendary family in the wrestling business that was started by a gentleman named Fritz von Erich, who is played by, as Vinny said, Holt McCallany, best known for Mindhunter, playing Bill Tench, the detective alongside Jonathan Groff in that series. And I agree, he was very good in that show. Such an underrated show. It's probably my favorite Netflix show ever. But he does such a great job playing the family patriarch, Fritz von Erich. And then you have his 4 boys in the movie. And it's Kevin von Erich, played by Zac Efron, Kerry von Erich, who's played by Jeremy Allen White, David von Erich, who's played by Harris Dickinson, and Stanley Simons in his big acting debut as Mike von Erich. This is by far the biggest thing he's ever done. Maura Tierney again plays Doris von Erich, the boy's mother and Fritz's wife. And then Lily James plays Pam, who is Kevin von Erich, Zac Efron's character's love interest.
Yes.
This is a movie, like we've said, is incredibly tragic, and because we skirted around it as much as possible. The family had 6 sons, and 5 of them are no longer with us. 5 of them died before the age of 35, and 4 of them died at the age of 25 or younger. 3 were due to suicide. 1 was due to a ruptured intestine. And 1, who I was talking to Liz about this earlier, I don't know if you read into this or anything, Vinny, but the youngest son that they reference in the movie, and you eventually see him at the end of the movie, and you see him in the beginning sequence too with Fritz when he's wrestling, he got electrocuted, and he fell into a pile of snow, passed out, and died drowning in a puddle of snow, essentially.
Huh.
So it's the most
what?
tragic circumstances that you could never even possibly imagine, and a family losing 1 child, let alone 5. Is incredibly tragic, and there's no other way to sort of wrap your brain around it. And this plays out throughout the film.
Yeah.
Let's start with the fact that throughout the movie, you literally get one off-screen, basically one off-scene death, essentially with David. But how did you guys feel about getting to that point? Because again, I knew that all of them died already. I didn't know exactly how. I didn't know, I never really knew all the details about where they were when they died, how they died, but I knew all of them died.
Okay.
So I knew it was coming, but it's still, when it hits you, because of the way that it's directed, I think it's really, again, it's just done in a really organic and I mean, beautiful is not the right word, but it's done in a way that makes you shocked. It makes you really feel it through the lens of the filmmaker. So, Liz, I'll start with you. How did that hit you, throughout the movie? Was it bang, bang, bang? Or was it hit you, oh my God, what the hell is happening? What is the rest of this movie going to be? Oh my God, another one. Can you explain that?
So the first one with David, I don't think was that surprising, only because they showed the blood in the toilet, where that right there, just being saying that the audience isn't stupid. It's okay, you're throwing up blood, something's wrong. And if you don't go to the hospital or get some care, something's going to happen. So I don't think that one was completely shocking. Definitely sad to see how it unfolds and affects them. Then I would say the next part for me that was I audibly gasped was okay, so you see Carrie after he wins the award, he gets on his motorcycle and they start showing the shot of on the front of the motorcycle, which great, loved that, first of all. And so I was great, this guy's gonna die now. I was he's just gonna get in a crash and that's gonna be it, because he was feeling so high and untouchable because he finally won. But oh my God, when he walks, when you finally see that he's awake, and then you see that his foot is just gone, I didn't expect that.
Now,
that, really shocked me.
Also, for reference, because I don't know if you again did the research, I found this out after the fact. When he went back into wrestling, no one knew that he was an amputee for his whole life, the remainder of his life.
Wait, what?
He hid that from everybody. He wore his boots everywhere. He never took them off in the locker room. And there was only a select few friends that he had in the wrestling industry that when they would go back to the hotel room, he would feel comfortable and he would tell them about it. But people in the wrestling industry didn't know until after he died that he was an amputee.
What?
Oh.
Yeah. Crazy.
Wait, but so didn't he go not perform or
well, they said he got
for,
he got into a motorcycle accident,
but they never
they never knew that he was an amputee, and he just said that he broke his ankle, and he literally said in interviews yeah, I'm feel my ankle's feeling better, I'm literally hid it from the world.
That's crazy.
That's so another little nugget to throw your way, but I feel throughout the pod I'll give you some of those. But yeah.
Wow, that like I have to digest that for a second because okay, so then like in my head, storytelling wise, he wanted to like the writers they clearly wanted to show the struggle. Like I'm curious why they didn't put that in the film at all.
That he didn't hide it from anybody.
Yeah, like they didn't.
Because I
hint
think
that
so
at
much of the
all.
story was based in the brothers, and they didn't like because and I do appreciate what you're saying too. The only time you really get a real sense of the wrestling industry, other than it being so substantial to their father, is in that montage that you get with Tom Sawyer.
Yeah,
Like they don't. It's not about what the other wrestlers think. I mean, they have the one moment with Ric Flair, obviously, but it's not. That's not crucial to the story.
I know, but I feel like that's crucial to like his character development.
But that's where you go back to the point where it's like it is an ensemble, but so much of the story
It's
is
not
heavily revolving around.
You're
Kevin.
right. You're right.
And I did see there was some criticism about how, but I don't know if these are wrestling fans or just again movie critics that are purists about storytelling. But some people thought that his character was underwritten. I disagree, and I liked the fact that they did show the struggle of the amputation. Like those were the standout scenes for me.
I agree.
With Jeremy Allen White. And I'm not saying that it wasn't a struggle for him. I'm sure it was. And I'm sure you can look back in interviews with Kevin and he'll tell you that. But I don't think they wanted to focus on that because to the Von Erich family, like nobody ever talked about it. It wasn't just the Kerry thing. Like the whole family kept it a secret. Like that's what he wanted when he came out of the hospital. He's like, we're not telling anybody that it's happened. So he was just on the shelf for a while and then he started training again. And I think he was... Which I know you had said off camera, like the timing stuff was a little weird for you.
Yeah, I don't know how you felt about this, Vinny, but I felt like it was a tiny bit hard just because I was taking in all this new information to figure out the time frame of everything. Like, is this months between the brothers passing away, or are we talking like years between the brothers passing? Did you like struggle with it at all, or no?
True. Timing wise, I don't know. I feel like I didn't really pay too much attention to that.
Mm-hmm.
I feel with the major wrestling matches that did occur, we did always get like a title card with a date on it, like 1983. And I believe the Ric Flair fight was that 1983 or 1986?
I do know that the true story of that is not 100% accurate to what they do in the movie, though.
Okay.
But yes, I do think that was in the early 80s. But are you talking about the Ric Flair match with Kerry or the Ric Flair match with Kevin?
With Kevin.
The claw.
Yeah,
the claw. Yeah. So that actually in real time, that match happened before Mike had passed away. And they do it in the movie as if he's feeling that way because of the death of two brothers, but that really actually happened in real life when David passed away. Okay. So the timing's a little different in terms of that, but yeah, no, they did. They also do show the title cards of like, again, I guess spacing it out for you, but
maybe I just didn't pay attention.
That's okay.
I do kind of understand what you mean though, because there was one moment where I didn't know it was when Mike died. I can't really place like the time frame of where Mike died. But I feel like it didn't really annoy me much. You know what I mean? Like I feel like I didn't take any points away from the film for that. But I do agree with you. There was that one moment, and just particularly with Mike's death, where it felt like it didn't. I couldn't figure out where it fit.
Like, are we talking like super fat? Like, I feel like I still don't know if this is like over years or like months.
I think it takes place over years, but again, I think that is the one liberty that Durkin did take with a lot of the story, trying to maneuver things around because of all these tragic events that happened throughout it, and just even the familial stuff. Like I know that that the one part where they show the promo when Kerry's wrestling in the big event where he wins the NWA World Championship. And they show the interview with Fritz standing next to Mike, and they're like, "Mike, you're gonna get in the wrestling world." Like that's 100% accurate to what actually happened.
Okay.
But the thing is, then Kerry gets in the accident, and then I'm pretty sure that they wait until all three of them are able to again, and then he basically steps in for David. It's not like it wasn't Kevin and Mike tag teaming, and then Mike had the tragic injury that also eventually happens, but I think all three of them were in the... Like, I think Kerry was already back in wrestling.
Okay.
I don't know if his recuperation, which is kind of insane to think about, but I don't think his recuperation was as long as we may have thought it was based on what they did in the movie. Like, I think he might have been out for like a year and a half, maybe, which is
Crazy.
insane to
That's
think about.
crazy.
Like he was, and I do think maybe I mean, they don't show it in the movie, but I think he had a prosthetic probably that he attached. I don't know exactly, but yeah, I mean, that's a crazy. It's a crazy detail that when I found that, I was also kind of in shock. But Vinny, I want to get your opinion too on like how the tragedy sort of hit you. Like did it come in bunches, or was it just like emotionally, was it a roller coaster? Like, can you explain what you were going through in the movies?
Yeah. So, wow. It's a lot. It's a lot to digest because I feel that, like I mentioned, I didn't know the details behind the tragedy, but I've heard of the Von Erich curse.
Mm-hmm.
So there was this like impending doom that was like overlooming the entire film for like the first half. And then the first half, I think why the tragedy hits is, I know you mentioned it before, that the characters, you really feel for them and you really like fall in love with them.
Mm-hmm.
And also, like, not to mention it again, but the cast, like, and all of them, like Jeremy Allen White, Harris Dickinson, Zac Efron, and who was playing
Stanley Simons.
Stanley Simons. They all added such charisma to the characters that I fell in love with them. And then when David died, you mentioned the toilet, the blood in the toilet. So like I knew that I was like, oh, all right, shit.
Like this is gonna go down soon. Like it's gonna be going down south soon.
Yeah. And then that was like shock, but I didn't hit it. It didn't hit me at first. And then, the film progressed and it just got worse and worse. And it slowly began to chip away at me. And it just like, by the end of it, with Carrie's death, and when Kevin is strangling Fritz, I was like, holy shit, like this is like it was like it took me over. And yeah, it was just a lot. It is
it's a lot.
Yeah.
I felt that this, like, a lot of movies do a good job when you're dealing with stories like this of showing you loss on screen, but like you were saying too, like this overarching feel of dread, like you feel the loss, which it's very hard as a director to be able to get that sort of emotional response from a movie-going audience. But the fact that all three of us in this room, like, were brought to tears by what came to be, and it's a true story, and it's, again, a story that had, like, the tragedy was so immense, and this is something we haven't brought up yet, which might be a good transitional point. The tragedy was so immense that there's an entire brother that is not mentioned in the movie.
Yeah.
And it's, some people online have issue with this. I do think that based on what the director Sean Durkin has said about it and how he talked to Kevin about the filmmaking process before that happened, I do think it makes sense story-wise and again, unfortunately, in like Hollywood terms, like why they had to do what they did. But there's such that feeling of just like draining. It just drains you after every single loss, and it feels like it's like if you go through a tragedy, and I know there's like a saying, it comes in threes, like when you hear of like one person passing away and then another one, it's like it happened in fives with this family. And and like you said, it wasn't over, like, unfortunately you had the confusion of it, but it's not like it happened over months, but still in a short amount of time these people were dying. I mean, two of the brothers were 21 and I know, Vinny, you had talked about this a little bit, like with Mike and Chris's Mike Von Erich and Chris Von Erich, who's not in the movie. Durkin sort of merges them as brothers together because, in an unfortunate way, their stories are so eerily similar. Like how they both killed themselves at age 21 and how they were both rushed into the wrestling business. And the injury that happens to Mike in the movie where he breaks his shoulder and he goes through that surgery, and it's supposed to be a routine shoulder surgery. It's absurd. And he gets toxic shock syndrome. That's real, by the way. That 100% happens. And so that was very true to Mike's story. The only thing that was similar to the Chris story was that Mike was actually a good wrestler before he got hurt. Chris had asthma and he was given an asthma medication like since he was younger, and it made his bones very brittle. So when he was rushed into wrestling, he would break things left and right, and he was not a good wrestler. Like synonymously, people always associated that with him, but both of them were very sweet. They were both musical, and they had that version. So that's why I
That
think Durkin
bond.
sort of brought them together as characters. And Kerry had talked about it in an interview where he was saying that basically he was okay and completely understanding to the decision that he wanted the movie to ultimately just be about the love of brothers and how he was able to survive all of it as like himself, just Kevin Von Erich. And he said that he lived by the message that no matter what, even on your darkest day, you keep fighting, life is worth it, which is great because that's sort of what you get in the end of the film. But sort of piggybacking off what you said too, the brotherhood in this movie is so authentic and it's so real and it's so obvious. Even when you, which I love, you see the interviews that all these guys are doing now that the movie's been released for Entertainment Weekly, on the Today Show, all these things. It's very obvious they formed a very serious bond in working together and going through the story and understanding what this family was like and how like close they all were. And I have a note here, which there's a scene in particular that I really love from the film where it's like the first scene that Pam meets the family and Mike wants to go. He goes, I got a gig. I got my first gig as a musician.
Yeah.
And his father and mother are like, absolutely not. You're not going there.
Yeah.
Like, you're not performing at a college. You're not going alone. Like, that's not happening. Like, it's not a job. And so the brothers sneak him out. And it's such a real moment of like the only people that these boys loved more than their father in a tragic way was their brothers.
Yeah.
And so you get to see that throughout the film in such an authentic way that also makes that feeling of loss so much heavier, because you're like, you could just tell that these guys absolutely adored one another. And the fact that it was tragedy after tragedy, and the fact that just the loss of David was so heavy on all of them that it drove three of them to the brink of insanity, and the pressure that came from Fritz. It's such a brilliant movie, and the way that they're able to sort of set that up, because it's not easy to do that. Like I know this is a year especially that I think is really loaded with great movies and great performances, but I think it's like you can't undersell how hard it is to do what this movie did in terms of building a family over a 2-hour period and tearing away at that family and having the audience feel that in such a deep level, because it, like I said, it's like, I'm like almost brought to tears talking about it because the story is just so heart-wrenching. You know what I mean? I just went on a tangent.
No, it's okay. I agree though. I think this movie would not have been as successful if the relationship of the brothers didn't feel like a true, honest sibling relationship. It kind of reminds me of like anytime like there's a like the Little Women remake, like if you don't have that solid foundation of sibling friendship, you just don't connect to the characters as much or feel that empathy and feel the connection between them. So I think they all did an incredible job. And then I also just love the contradicting moment, and I guess it's also just like in the story and in like all of them wrestling, is that they all love each other so much, but then at the same time they're competing against each other at all times because they're in the same world. And you can see that it kind of eats them in their insides of not wanting to compete against their brother, but then also being like, I want to be a great wrestler at the end of the day for my dad. And so I need to beat my brother in order to do this. So I think that whole element comes in too, on top of the grief, which is so messed up, and just adds to them kind of losing their minds as a family of like, how can we continue being rivals when we've just lost a brother, and then we've lost another one, and we've lost another one. And I think, I mean, my first teary-eyed moment of when it started to get to me was when Mike, the brother, was just like eating the pills, because I was like, oh my God, this poor boy just is pushed so over the edge and doesn't feel like he has a way out, and that they're forcing him to go back into wrestling and like talking about it, that he is just like, I have to end this, I can't do it. And the fact that they showed it on camera too, it was I just loved the storytelling of how they unfolded all the tragic moments and how they did each one differently. Like the first one was off camera. The first one, you don't necessarily watch him die, but you watch like him deciding to do it, and like the lead up, which I just think is like incredibly heartbreaking. But that one, I started crying.
Yeah,
It was so sad.
It is. It's incredibly sad. And again, I want to give, because so much of this we're going to talk about Efron, and we have been, and Jeremy Allen White. Stanley Simons, to do what he did in those small moments where he is alone, and like even him strumming the guitar before he goes out and eventually like goes to like basically isolate himself to take his own life. Like there's so much. He has a very bright future. Like the fact that this is what he was able to do with this, and still also as someone who's not a very experienced actor. Similar to like how we talked a little bit about earlier in the year about Dominic Sessa and how he just made himself like I could imagine. I feel like you see it told on screen, but it's like he glued himself to like Giamatti and Divine Joy Randolph and what that experience was like being a student in that school. Stanley Simons, he was a brother to the same of these three actors that have been in leads in television shows and Disney Channel stars and the biggest star on TV right now and Emmy winners. Like, he was able to really immerse himself within his brothers throughout that. And that scene in particular, like you were talking about, where he takes the pills is awful. And the scene with the press conference, and it's crazy because you see it on Kevin the whole time too, where he's like, this shouldn't be happening anymore.
Yeah.
But what am I going to do? Because like you said, they just love their father so deeply. And there's a scene earlier on in the movie that it's played for laughs because it's early on in the movie and you don't know the tragic story. Like played for laughs, I guess, in a sense. But it's when they're all sitting at breakfast in the morning and he goes, everybody knows that Carrie's my favorite. He goes, Carrie's my favorite, followed by Kevin, followed by David, and then Mike. He goes, but that doesn't mean the rankings can't change.
Yeah.
So you're putting the pressure on your children. Like, and think about how many people in life, like your own parents that are like, oh, I don't pick favorites. Like, well, this guy sure did. And it had an effect on every single decision they made in their lives. And I also love how there's the juxtaposition with Pam, Lily James as Kevin's wife, where she just brings such a tenderness to and just again like the exact opposite of what Kevin had known. And they show it in a great way too, where she asks for his autograph and then she's like, has everyone ever taught you how to talk to a woman? It's like, no, he's like, no, I only know like my brothers.
Yeah,
like,
literally.
I talk to my brothers. And then you see it later on in the film when I think I don't know if he's at the funeral for, I don't know if he's at the funeral for Carrie or he's at the funeral for Mike, but she's like, are you coming home tonight? And he's like, I don't know. And she's like, well, I can't do this anymore.
Or no. Actually,
I think
it was
it's Carrie, right?
It was Carrie.
So, and she's like, I can't do it like this anymore. Like, like
she's like, I didn't sign up for this.
You need to come home to me. Like, this is our family. And I understand. And again, just the movie is brilliant.
There's just so many layers to it.
Yes.
And like, I'm talking about that scene because like you could take it as just like she can't do this, like him not coming home. But then there's also the element of him being like, I'm not coming home because I don't want this curse to like go on our child. And she is just so adamant on being like, it's not a curse. Like things are happening, but like it's not a curse to you guys. It's choices are made and things happen. And so I love that juxtaposition too of her character. I thought she was great.
Yeah. Totally agree. I mean, from piggybacking off of the both of you guys, going back to just like the connection that's established in the first half of the film is remarkably done. Like just little scenes like them picking up Mike from band practice. Yeah. And like, I almost thought, just from like instinct, I thought they were gonna bully Mike, but no, they lifted him up. And throughout the entire first act, they're all lifting each other up. They're not making fun of each other or any of that. And even if they do, it's very lighthearted.
Yeah,
it's an understanding that it's comedic, and the establishment of that connection is so well done for when the tragedy does occur. It's like, wow. It's very troubling on the audience and the characters involved. And also Pam's character. I know you guys directed it towards me when mentioning her, which it's interesting because I feel like for me, this might be controversial, but for me, I didn't really take her character away as much as I did the other characters. I felt like I kind of overlooked her which might have just been my fault as the audience, but now that you mention it, like her being is really important. Like her being there is significant to Kevin, and you really see that, like the word juxtaposition that you mentioned, you see that where it's like the caring and then versus the toxicity that Fritz von Erich set up at, the very toxic mindsets indoctrinated into these children that they don't know anything else except for that. Which almost adds even more tragedy to the situation. You know what I mean? Because like that in of itself is tragic to think about. You know what I mean? Yeah, that's my thoughts on that. Just it's so. Yeah, you said before, beautiful is not the word, but it's so incredibly done that I don't almost have no other words to describe it.
Well, I want to go off what you were just saying too, and how the movie is so much about family and the impact of what the environment around you is and you grow up into. Because like, think about, there's a lot of people that are fans of wrestling that think Fritz is very responsible for everything that happened. And I think, I'm not saying you're also in saying that, Vinny, but I know based on what you're saying, you're like, I hated his character, and he does a lot of messed up stuff that puts it in a very hard like context. Like, why would you like his character? All the things he puts his kids through, even the one at the end when you get Carrie's death scene, which I do want to say that's actually not how it actually played out. When Carrie died, Fritz actually found Carrie, which is very interesting how they changed that up a little bit. But I do think it's interesting again for the dramatic effect, but it hits so hard where Kevin calls his father and he's like, it's the first time he has a moment where he's like, all right, I need to call my dad, and he needs to understand, which again, similar to the juxtaposition early in the movie when he goes, Mom, you got to talk to Dad. He's being too hard on everybody. And she's like, talk to your father. That's your guy's problem with him. And they're all scared. Like they can't, like they don't want to look weak in front of their father. And they're like trying to sort of leverage their mother into saying something so that they can feel that they're not the ones that are sort of being outed as being the ones to say it. And Maura Tierney is like, that's not happening. Like, I'm not going to do that. That's your own business with your father. And so he calls his father and he's like, he goes like, Kerry is not right. He's like, and I want to go out there and I want to see him, but he's not letting me. He's like, but when he comes over, like, you need to understand, like, you got to go get him. Like, you got to figure this out. He's not okay. And it is true that at least in the terms of, like, when he did kill himself, Carrie, his father, was like pouring cement. Like, he was doing something else on the grounds. Like, he wasn't keeping an eye on his son. And in the real story of what happened, Carrie, like, moments before it happened, like, hugged his father and he said he loved him. And then he was alone, and then he killed himself. Which, going back to the documentary, the one documentary I had watched is an episode from this really great docu series called Dark Side of the Ring, which you can watch all the episodes on Hulu. It started on Vice, and it tells all these insane stories, true stories of what have happened in professional wrestling. And Kevin Von Erich, again, the only surviving member of the brothers, he's the one getting interviewed for so much of the story, along with other wrestling historians and people that worked in the industry. And he triples down on the fact that they loved their father, despite all of this that has happened, and how hard he was on them, and there was the pressure that was built in, and how he pushed his other sons into wrestling, even when they probably didn't want to do it. They loved their dad. And they were grateful for what they had, and they loved their family, and they loved how they grew up, which is crazy to think about because 5 of them are gone from the earth. Forever, at ages that were like unbeknownst to people. And the director also talks about, he goes, when kind of sort of going back to the Chris thing, there were so many other things that they had to cut out of the movie because there's more tragedy. Like David had a daughter that died. Like, oh my God, that's never brought up. Kerry had an entire family. They don't talk about it. Like, they had to cut things out because of how much. And I know that some of the criticism with the Chris thing, and I was talking to my cousin about this, who I saw the film with, and I was like, at some point, though, does your audience stop, like, believing it, even though it's real? because there's so much tragedy that happens. It's like it's more and more and more and more and emphasizing like all of these tragic events, but it's like this is their reality. Like this is what they live through, which is.
I also think like yes, you want to keep true to the story, but at a certain point, this is a narrative. If you want to know every little detail, go read about it or watch a documentary. I think that you have to have some like give and take on stories with narratives because it's not to just deliver hard, cold facts. It's about creating an art piece at the end of the day, too. It's about having a story and making the audience walk away, having a feeling, not just with a ton of new information. I do want to talk about Maura Tierney's performance because when I was like reading some things after, a lot of people were like, oh, Fritz von Erich was the one that like pushed his sons too hard. Like it was the dad, blah, blah, blah. I just kept thinking that like the whole like for what changed for me from because I feel like Kevin's family, he has 2 sons. He's kind of just like his dad a little bit. Like he totally could have kept that ball rolling of like putting your sons into wrestling, like boys don't cry, you do this. But that's why I think Pam's character is so important because it's her difference versus their mom's character. Those are the 2 people that for me are so different that then cause that are the catalyst to then change the story for that family because Doris von Erich just goes along with what her husband wants. She just says like, yep, like even when, oh my God, it's like her son's funeral and she's not crying because you just heard her husband say like, keep the tears. Like, what did he say? He was like, I want to see no tears today. Like take those sunglasses off, like no tears. And here this woman is like getting ready and she's like trying not to cry at her son's funeral. And so she almost, and I know it was probably like the time of like a wife does what her husband wants, like she follows his lead. And so she didn't put her foot down of like, you're pushing the boys too hard. She kind of just went along with it. So I don't put the blame fully on the father. But then also, that's where Pam comes in and she's like, don't listen to your dad. Like, quit wrestling. Like, pull it together. We have a family now. Like, don't just, like, follow this loop. And so, for me, Lily James's character was a big pivotal storyline change for me.
Yeah, and Maura Tierney does good. Those I do love how you see, though, again, despite maybe runtime, you could have seen some things a little different. But she gets these 2 moments. One of them I know you list on your notes, so I want you to talk about it. But there's one, too, where I believe it's after Carrie dies, and she's in her room staring at the dress.
Oh.
Yeah.
And she's like,
I can't put it on.
And Pam walks in, she goes, I can't put it on. They're going to know. They're going to know that this is the exact same dress I've worn twice now.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't do that. And it just rips. Like, there's so many
it's
moments
so
in this movie that rips your insides out. It's incredible. And the other one is the ending of the film with her and Fritz, which I would love for you to talk about because you have it written in your notes too.
Yeah.
And the cinematography specifically. Yeah.
So this one scene, which also emphasizes, like you mentioned, Maura Tierney's incredible performance. Very underrated.
Very. She is super subtle throughout the whole thing.
Yeah. And she doesn't get a lot of screen time. But when she does, you have those moments, like the scene with the dress. And that's a scene that really sold it for me. I was like, wow. Like the amount of emotion she's able to capture in just that one, that line delivery and just that short scene.
And the restraint that she has. Because she could have totally easily been like, I can't wear this dress. Like, I can't do it. But it's that, like, control of not letting her emotions seep through. Oh my God. So good. So good.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And also, sorry, not to get off track, but that last shot of Fritz and Doris, which is something I wrote down as an incredible use of creative visual storytelling. The last shot we see of them, we don't see Doris at first. She's out of frame, and we only see Fritz asking for food. And in this is how I interpreted it, but it shows that Fritz doesn't actually see Doris for who she really is. And it solidifies that, that she has been constantly indoctrinated and controlled by her husband. And then the camera dollies in to show the audience that she's painting, which is also a callback to when she told Mike about her painting. But she mentioned that she never told anyone she painted it, and that she'd forgotten the reasons why she painted it, which is like also so telling of her character. Like once she got into this marriage, it's like everything of who she was just forgotten and just like pushed to the side. But now we dolly in and we finally see her, and we see her how she truly is. And I thought that last shot of them was just so powerful, because in that scene too, what is Fritz doing? Controlling her. Where's my food?
Yeah,
that's what he asked.
What am I gonna eat?
What am I gonna eat? I'm hungry. Yeah.
So it's I thought that was just
I agree. I loved it. It was also a great ribbon to like her character, because the whole time she is kind of just following along, and she was finally like the shoe dropped of her putting her foot down. I mean, it took her 4 sons passing away for her to finally be like, I'm not doing this anymore. I also think it's interesting now that I'm like thinking of their scenes. The first scene when they're all younger and he just like got out of the fight and he's showing her the car
The
that
Cadillac,
he just and she's like, how much did this cost? Actually, I don't even want to know. Which then, like, I feel like that line alone just enabled the whole entire rest of their lives of like, oh, your brother's struggling. I don't want to know. Like, go deal with it.
Yeah.
Oh, you're like, somebody's dying. Oh, I don't want to know.
Yeah, and I do think, which I love that you brought up the scene where she shows the painting to Mike after he'd sort of gone through the toxic shock syndrome, and you can tell that there's a lot that is out of him at this point. And I think that it's also telling how great that scene is in terms of how she gives away this thing that she talks to somebody and tells them that she painted it for the first time, because she sees this innocence in her son, and she feels the need to like, it gives her a glimpse of like, I feel so like, you don't see throughout the whole entire movie, throughout what they're going through, that she feels bad about anything that's happening. And in this moment, she's like, I need to like tell my son something that will make me feel good and will make him feel good. And it's, oh my God, the movie, I'm gonna cry. This movie is so emotional, man.
Well, should we talk about the ending?
Yeah, so I know, because I know you
God.
brought it up to me too. And it's definitely a scene I want to talk about, because that is the scene that like made me weep. Like, that was,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
So Liz, why don't you take this one away on what happens?
Okay, so after the whole story, you've just been beaten and beaten and beaten, and finally Kevin like sells the company, and he's just kind of ready to move on with life, I feel like, at this point. And you see him sitting like crisscross in his field watching his 2 boys playing football, and all of a sudden you just see him like crying while watching his sons, and like he's just crying. And this is the first time that which is just great directing, or maybe acting, I don't know who made the decision to not let Kevin's character show any sort of like tears at all throughout the whole film until this final moment.
No real moment of heartbreak,
right?
There's
Nothing.
no real moment.
There's
of
no
heartbreak.
real moment of heartbreak. At the funerals, he's not really crying. He's just kind of looking off at the distance, because in his head he's probably like, my father keeps saying no tears, boys don't cry, boys don't cry. And so finally it's like a breath of fresh air when you see him just like crying by himself. And then his 2 boys like run over to him and are like, Dad, what's wrong? And he's like, I'm sorry, boys, like don't do this. And they are just like, it's okay, like everybody cries, like I cry. Oh my God. But the saddest part, I feel like what really got everybody was the line of like, I'm not a brother anymore.
Oh yeah.
And then they say,
I could cry right now.
And they say, we'll be your brother's
We'll be your
dad.
brother.
It's the best.
It's so moving, and just it's really like you've been saying that it finally like brings you hope of like, there's no more curse, like you can do this, like life is gonna go on. There's been horrible things, but you now have like, it's up to you to break those chains that you guys have been like holding on through a family. It was so beautiful.
Yeah, and I love how there's no cliche ways of callbacks in this movie, because like you talked about with the scene that wraps up Doris's story, and then you see the one scene of all the brothers playing football as soon as Carrie gets back from the Olympics.
Oh,
or
yeah.
how the Olympics didn't wind up happening. So he was at the practices for the Olympics and things like that, and they come back and they play football, and the whole time Prince is like, "You're not going to catch your brother. You're not going to be able to make that catch. You're never going to keep up with Carrie," and David's just letting them play.
Yeah.
Just letting them be two young boys and just play football with one another and embrace that. And it's just so insane to see, like you were saying, Liz, the difference between like the fact that you have that silver lining in what Pam had become and resembles or symbolizes, I should say, for Kevin and his future and his family. And you get the perfect wrap up at the end of the movie where you see that the whole family live. He says early on in the movie, I want to live with all my brothers. I want to have a giant land. I want to have a farm.
And have everybody
and I
live
want to
with
have
me.
everybody live with me. And now everybody lives with them.
Yep.
Everyone in his family lives.
They have like 14 grandkids now in real
and they all
life?
live in Hawaii together.
Crazy.
It's incredible. It's like one of the most perfect stories encapsulated on screen that I've seen in a very, very long time.
It was beautiful. I loved the ending. I also really loved, I want to talk about with you guys what your thoughts were on after Carrie dies, how they show like him and meeting his brothers.
Oh, the heaven sequence.
Yes. Oh my God. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, a really great. I love how you have the callback to the young brother. Oh my God.
That's when I started. I was like, this is it. I was like, I'm gonna go. I was gonna start crying.
Tapping out. No, it's a great sequence, and he floats in and on the boat, and they're all waiting on the
They're
dock
like,
for
hey
him.
brother, and I was like, no.
It's amazing. Did you like that sequence, Vinny?
Yeah. So
Vinny's like, no.
I'm not.
Vinny's like, didn't hit me whatsoever.
Didn't hit me.
No, all good. I liked it. But I'm not gonna lie. At first, because you have that incredible scene of the death of Carrie, and Kevin attacks Fritz, and then he carries Carrie's body into the home, and you can see like he's about to break down.
Yeah.
That scene was like, I'm holding back tears. I'm practically tearing up at that point. I thought the heaven scene at first was like a little bit of like, it took me out of it. It was like,
you thought it was like cheesy, or what did you think? It was.
I thought for a moment, I was like, oh shit, this is gonna be cheesy as hell.
See, I loved
it. But I will say, like, what I loved about it was when the camera tilts down to Carrie's feet, and then he has his foot and he jumps, and he's all happy, and then the reunion with the youngest brother that died. Yeah, that sold me for it. That's all. I will say, like, I'm not like, I like that scene. Don't get me wrong, I like it, but at first, that switch of like, oh, this is a heaven scene, kind of threw me off.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand that. Though.
Yeah.
See, I disagree though, because I feel like films, once somebody dies, it's like, okay, their story's done. And so I liked that they like gave space for the other brothers to have a wrap up and not just they died, no more talking about them.
Yeah, it sort of resembled, like, at least the fan in me, for like knowing the whole story too. It also resembles this real moment of like, everybody knows this story for what the story is, that they're all dead. Like that, and instead of that being the legacy and the attachment to what this movie is, oh, that's the movie about where all the wrestling family died, right?
Yeah.
No, it's like, no, they all get their moment together as brothers with what they all wanted, and based on what Kevin has like always says in interviews, and like he had spoken to Sean Durkin and said, I just want this movie to be about my brothers. Like that's a scene that I do feel like it's essential to sort of giving you that piece of like, well, you know what, as awful as this is, and Kevin's the one that still talks about how he's been able to survive, and you got to just appreciate life for what it is, and now look at what he has what he always wanted. But you get the sense that these brothers are together, despite the fact, like, again, they might have, I mean, they were driven to the brink of drug abuse, and they were driven to the point of trying to, suicide and things like that, but they were good, genuine people, and you see that on screen, and you see it through their brotherhood. Like, I forgot about the scene where they go pick up the brother from the band, but that's a scene too where it's like he gets in the car. He goes, "We're gonna go eat something," and he goes, "I'll get a burger with your little brother,"
Yeah.
even though he says he doesn't want one, and
Yeah.
they're all eating them.
Yeah.
Like, there's so much to that authentic familial feeling that you get for them throughout the movie. So I do think it's. I understand where you're coming from, because again, the movie hits you so hard in so many different ways, but I do think it was a scene. I agree with you, Liz, where it did feel that it was something that it really wrapped up the story of the brothers and made you at least feel good for a second about where they ended up, despite all the things they've gone through in their life.
Yeah,
for sure.
No, that's a good point that you make, actually. Because we were talking about how before, like, with a narrative, you have to leverage how much you want to include. And if they just included everything, it might have felt too bloated and too much trauma, and just began to feel repetitive, which it feels really harsh saying that, because this happened to real people.
Yeah.
But through a narrative perspective, it could just become repetitive trauma and lose its spice. But I like now that you mention that this occurs with the last death in the family. The heaven scene occurs at the last death, and it gives them a happy ending rather than it being just a film about the trauma.
Just death. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I will say though, because I didn't know I didn't know the story. When Carrie is like on the boat and like going into heaven, because they cut very abruptly from Kevin carrying Carrie like into the kitchen and like placing him on the table, and like you don't know what's happening. Kind of, you're like, oh my god, wait, why? Like, why is he bringing him into the table? Like, what's going on? And then they cut to him on the boat. There was literally a second where I was like, tell me Kevin is going to be all of a sudden on another boat and like he killed himself. That's where I thought the story was going for a second.
That would've been crazy.
I'm not
crazy.
kidding. I was like, tell me all the brothers just die. Because I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know if he like lived or not. And so I
Yeah.
thought that they were all going to be like hugging and then be like, brother.
Could you
and
imagine
then
that
it's
was
Zac
the end of the movie?
Efron.
That would take so much. That would take so much out of it.
That's what I thought, because I didn't know he was still alive.
Yeah.
At this point, I was like,
because you've gone through so
no,
much.
I was like,
trauma
okay,
yourself.
well, so the story must be that they all died. I literally was prepared for that. I was like, here we go. Zac Efron's gonna be on a boat next.
Oh my god, that would have been
Yeah.
that would have been
really
crazy.
crazy.
To see,
It would have been
honestly.
insane.
Would have been nuts.
Yeah.
We've covered the story of this so much, and Vinny, I know as someone like you said, as a director of photography, there is a lot to love in terms of this film. If you want to give a couple of standout moments for you in terms of the way that they're able to sort of visualize this story for the audience, because I do think that this year, especially, like another, I guess, comparison to The Holdovers, were two films where it just completely places you in the era. Like you
Yeah.
feel that
Oh,
you're
yeah.
in 70s wrestling and 80s wrestling and just old like Southern charm and Southern like farmland, and this is who we are, and pickup trucks and muscle tees. Like that's
Yeah.
like. But that's so much of what they grew up in, even down to the haircuts. Like
The
but that was
haircuts.
what they looked like legitimately. So, I don't know if there were specific things you wanted to talk about, but the floor is yours, my friend.
Yeah, I really want to talk about the technical side of things. So first off, to begin, the cinematography, I really adored it. The cinematographer for this was a Hungarian cinematographer who previously collaborated with Sean Durkin on his film The Nest, which I have not seen. Like I mentioned, I was not familiar with any of Sean Durkin's work, but I can assume that they've formed a good like companionship together, and that his name is Machez Earl D. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it 100% correctly, but this film was all shot on 35mm Kodak film, and it just, like you mentioned, it gives such a good job. It does such a good job at adding to the time period. You know, you have that grit to it, and it's shot on film. Obviously, digital wasn't really a thing during the events of this film, so it just places you right there into it. And I just overall thought his use of motivated lighting and photography in this film was it made it feel so much more real. You know, like I appreciate when films, they don't, especially the cinematographers, when they take more of a naturalistic standpoint on it. And that being like certain examples that stood out to me were the nighttime scenes when they're speaking on the phone, or when Kevin and Carrie are talking before his motorcycle accident, you know, with the belt on the table and they're talking. It's all very very motivated lighting coming from the windows, and the only time when it feels artificial are the scenes that are artificial, the wrestling scenes, which I really appreciate. Like, they ham it up for there, because, you know, those were scenes that were hammed up in the context of the story.
Yeah, for sure.
I also love the Early and Durkin's decisions to use long takes, and a lot of like the heavy hitting moments are just long takes of these actors going at it, you know, just putting their all into it. And then they often incorporate with these long takes the slow zoom. And I found this really interesting because not only did it add dynamic movement to these very static shots, but it also provided as like a visual motif and metaphor. Like, with every tragedy, their world is getting smaller and smaller as time passes by, and as a result, like, they're getting more confined and tight, and like the tension is just building and building. I just adored that. Also, not to mention, going into the musical side of things, I thought the soundtrack did such a good job. I thought also it kind of all goes, you know, I mentioned before how like every element in this film complements each other, and that opening scene and most of the film, but mostly that opening scene, reminded me a lot of Raging Bull. And I think they took a lot of inspo from Raging Bull, because like the black and white photography, the slow motion, the slow dissolve of the title card, and like the score. Score was done by Richard Reed Parry, and that opening track is The Claw, and it's like epically grandiose, but it has like this overlooming dark dread to it. And that's reminded me of Raging Bull, and it also is just like a perfect tone setter for what's to come.
And for his character. To give you a real glimpse of who Fritz was, not only in the ring, but showing you like how heavy of that toll was of him in the ring and being this grizzled heel, like for the bad guy in wrestling terms, of just completely like dismantling opponents and being the. And I know that his character in wrestling originally, he transitioned to Von Erich to go with basically like he wanted to portray the worst possible person that you could be in terms of wrestling. So he basically played a Nazi. Like that was like his character in wrestling. So it was like he changed his name to Von Erich to have that German sort of thing too. And then again, like even the fact that someone had the brain to do something like that and then showcase and transition from the black and white sequence in the ring into what his family life eventually became and the pressure that he put on his kids was again another great job in terms of direction and editing and so much of the below the line stuff. And also, not to mention just setting the time period. I think production design and costume design and makeup and hair, like we mentioned, the haircuts, it all pulls together. Like the scene, what really stood to me when it all clicked was towards the beginning when it's like outside of the venue, and that's when Pam and Kevin first meet. And then you see all the cars, you see all the costume on display. There's this awesome tracking shot that's going from one girl getting an autograph and then following them to Kevin to eventually to Pam. That just like it reminded me of like the Boogie Nights one take, or like Dazed and Confused too. It had some Dazed and Confused.
100%, 100%. And also like Goodfellas, obviously, like the inspo is there and it pays off because you see an excellent display of costume design, makeup, production design all come together, and also that really stood out to me too. That's where the cinematography was like, I noticed like, oh shit, this is all going to be shot on film, and yeah, it's just beautiful. Just beautiful.
The movie overall, like I feel like if we keep, we're gonna keep going across the same point. I feel like we've literally discussed the entire movie, which we don't usually even do in our reviews. But there's so much takeaway from this movie. I feel like we should probably wrap it up.
Probably. I just want to say one thing that I thought they did really well. For people that like don't watch wrestling, I always say, I mean, you and I have had conversations about it, of me being like, oh, it's fake. And so when she asks him on like the first date, when she's like, it's all like pre-planned, right? And he's like, well, no. But like,
because that's what a wrestler would say.
Yeah, he's like, well, no, because like we're doing it in real time, so it's not fake. But then you see that scene of them being like, okay, so you're gonna do this, then you're gonna do that, and then you're gonna do this, and I'm like, so it is fake.
Yeah, it's all scripted, and it's that element though of like that pride of being like, well, no, like I came from this in my family, and like this isn't fake to us. Like this is our life.
Because arguably, I'm gonna argue with myself a little bit. It's not really fake because they still can get injured in real time. Like they're still doing it.
That's what comes. I mean,
just because it's planned doesn't mean it's not real. Think
about the fact that Kerry Von Erich wrestled with an amputated foot for.
No, that's crazy. That's insane, and that nobody knew.
Nobody knew. Well, like I said, a few select wrestlers that he was very close with knew, but like the industry didn't know that until after he died. Everyone thought he just had an ankle injury, and it took a long time to recover. Crazy,
man.
Incredible.
Crazy.
I think it's time for scores.
Okay.
We talked about this movie for a very long time, but I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode because we've definitely enjoyed talking about the movie. My New Year's resolution before the New Year is that I'm going to go to 0.5s and full scores.
Yeah.
So I'm transitioning to that. Not that this one is going to need a half score because to me this is a 10. I think this is a movie. This is a movie that, and I will say in terms of like the 10, because people always argue like, well, 10's a perfect movie. To me, a 10 is a movie that feels like one of the greatest experiences I've had.
And that you don't have obvious complaints about.
Yes, like there's nothing that I would look at in terms of this movie besides very minor things that we've talked about that would make me upset. And again, even in terms of I appreciate and I feel like lucky enough to see this from the perspective of like understanding the story of this family in wrestling, but also being a former filmmaker myself and understanding Durkin's motivations to do what he had to do in terms of I don't want to say manipulating, but changing the story in a way that serves the narrative better for the audience. And like we've talked about, I mean, so many things, just quick wrap up, but like Efron is phenomenal. You get really great character moments still from all of the supporting players, even like every single character has a pivotal moment. And I think that is just great writing and that's great directing. And Durkin did both, which is awesome. I would love for him to get nominated for things too. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen. I hope this gets like costume, like you said. I hope it gets costuming. Something. I hope it gets makeup. All these different awards that I hope it gets nominated for. But there is a part of me that just really is hopeful that people can start to see how great of a job Efron did of carrying the weight of this trauma and tragedy through the Von Erich family as Kevin Von Erich. This is one of my favorite movies of the year. It's one of a number of other movies I've given 10s to because there's so many other. Like I said, I think 2023 has been a terrific year for cinema, and I really am hopeful that this continues a trend going forward. And luckily, we have studios like A24 that makes movies like this and allows opportunities for filmmakers like Sean Durkin to tell stories like this on screen. But I absolutely adored this movie, and as hard as a watch as it is, this is one that I will definitely rewatch, and I will constantly revel in how brilliant the storytelling is at its highest level. So I'm giving Iron Claw a 10.
Wow.
Liz?
Wow. You're going to be shocked. I have only given out 2 other 10s this year, and that was Barbie and Past Lives. I truly don't have anything negative to say about this film. The one thing that I had to say was that I got confused on timeline, but now that I talked to you guys, maybe it was just me. So I am also going to give this a 10.
Wow, that's crazy.
I can pick out a few things of like that performance was weak. They could have wrapped up the story a little bit more, or you know me with like runtime, it can kill a movie for me. I didn't feel this runtime at all. It felt very good pacing wise. And the only thing that I would have said was actual timeline was a bit confusing, but I feel like maybe it's just because I was overloaded with information that I wasn't able to pick up on it. So it's going in. It's got one of the 10s this year.
That. I do have a quick question before we go to Vinny. All the Strangers did not get a 10 from you?
Well, I haven't reviewed it on this podcast yet.
Okay,
but it will.
Okay, so it'll be 4. But
so
still,
it will be 4.
But still, no, I'm shocked by that, but I'm very happy to hear that.
Yeah.
All right, Vinny, we cut to you.
Ooh.
Are you gonna let us all
Vinny's
down?
gonna be like 7.
No,
I'm kidding,
no
I'm
way. You
kidding.
can tell based on
no,
way.
No, he loved it.
I adored this film. However, my main
Ooh,
my main rule that I usually go by is I never give 10s out on first watch. I need to
okay.
I need to rewatch.
I like that.
it.
I like
need
that.
to rewatch it.
I like it. I like
Yeah.
it a lot.
So I think that Iron Claw will probably get a 10 from me.
But as of right now,
But as of right now, it's a good 9.5.
Okay.
Great.
I just
so
need
it's
to
gonna
watch
get a
it.
10.
We'll
It's
get it.
gonna get.
It'll be a 10 eventually.
It'll get up there.
It's gonna definitely get a 10 from me eventually, if not in the next week of me just thinking about it.
Do you have other 10s that you've rated this year already?
No,
Okay.
no,
Okay.
because that's my usual rule that I
You got to
play
watch
by.
it a second time.
Yeah. So it's really hard because numbers are difficult sometimes. So 10, but as of right now, that also
put you at
a
a 9.5.
9,
Put
a
9.5
9.5.
will
Yeah,
bring you
I'll
in
put you
at.
down for a 9.5.
Everybody has their
So,
own things. Because
that's
for
true.
me, if I can pick out one thing that I'm like, that could have changed, then it's a 9. But if there's truly nothing, like Barbie to me, perfection, nothing needs to be changed. People would argue with me on that, obviously.
Well, there's a big chunk of Barbie for me that brings it down
exactly
considerably.
But for me, it was perfection. And then past lives, oh my God.
Yeah, that might be. I mean, I've been thinking about it because I'm at, like you said, you're at 4 10s, which Vinny, close your ears because I know you're a big fan of the 10s.
You're at
I'm at 6 for the year, which is
it's a lot.
way more than
That's a lot.
than I've ever.
What are they?
thought
Let's
of.
hear them.
Well, one of them we're gonna review later this week, so I don't want to talk about that.
Oh, okay.
It's Iron Claw, Past Lives, Beyond the Spider-Verse, or is it Across the Spider-Verse? What's the second one? Is Beyond the
across the
Across the Spider-Verse, Past Lives, Oppenheimer, this film, The Holdovers, and one more that we're going to talk about later in the week that I don't want to give away. So yeah, I mean, I think I would argue this is the best movie year, definitely since 2019, the year the Parasite won Best Picture. I want to take a look, and that movie's brilliant. I mean, I think that's one of the greatest movies ever made. So, but I'd have to take a look again at the rest of that year and see what else came a few years before that. But I think this is the best movie year in a very long time.
It's a hard
tough.
season.
It is. It's a great time to be a movie fan, though. It's a great time to be a cinephile. It's a great time to be watching the Cinema Wave podcast, everyone.
Hey.
So I have truly loved this conversation with you guys. If you guys have enjoyed this conversation, please give us a like, subscribe to the page. We have a ton of reviews coming just this week alone. We're talking about we just did the Iron Claw. We're going to talk about Maestro. We're going to talk about Rebel Moon Part 1. We're going to be talking about Poor Things. We have a Marvel Cinematic Universe Town Hall sort of wrap up of Phase 4 that we're going to be discussing later in the week as well. That'll drop next week. Plus, the new year is coming. We have a whole new year of cinema coming for you guys very soon. Tons of things to talk about on movies and TV. So please hit the bell to get your alerts for when we put out new videos. If you guys don't already, follow us at Cinema Wave Media on Instagram. We're also on TikTok and Threads and Facebook. You can also follow us at _Culture Wave Media on Instagram and at Jersey's Finest Pod for our Jersey's Finest podcast content on Instagram as well. Just signing off, I am Darian Scalamoni.
I am Liz Seiko.
And I'm Vinny Albano.
And we'll see you guys next time.